A man came out of the press pen, with a camera bag hanging low. Too much weight, too planned. He leaned over to Prince George and said, "Mom's waiting by the red Jaguar." Prince George knew right away. There wasn't a Jaguar. He remembered the lesson when he was 10. Don't yell, don't run, give the signal. His hand went up, with the palm open, the thumb tucked in, and the fingers folded, the silent prayer that every youngster learns but hopes they never have to use. Marcus Hale, a Lance Corporal, saw it, and in that moment, the rules were broken. His rifle went from the ceremony to the suspect in a flash. But what was in that bag? And how close did the idea come to working before the whole courtyard went crazy? Before I tell you what happened in those scary minutes, make sure you're subscribed and like the video. Also leave a comment telling us where you are in the world. Let's get started now. The sun in the spring shone brightly on Graydon Court at St. James's Palace, the kind of light that made London feel like it could be real again after a long, gloomy winter. The flags snapped in the restless April breeze, and their bright colors stood out against the cream-colored stone walls that had seen this exact event happen for years. The air had that special smell you only get in central London, with exhaust fumes mingling with the pleasant smell of lilacs from St. James's Park. The metallic taste of ancient iron railings that the sun warmed in the afternoon. Tourists pushed 3 deep against the black walls, their phones already lifted like offerings to whatever show was about to come out of the palace. A German family had taken the best corner site an hour early, and their handbook was full with marked passages. American voices rang out over the crowd, as parents lifted their kids up on their shoulders so they could see better. Someone's camera flash went off by mistake, which made the serious photographers with their professional gear shush angrily. Graydon Court breathed with a heavy silence that only happens in settings when history is not just remembered, but also acted out. The stones themselves seemed to soak up sound, turning the normal loudness of a London afternoon into something more respectful. From someplace beyond the main arch, brass instruments called to each other in warm-up scales. Their tones bounced off of old walls and settled into the bones of everyone there. Marcus Hale could feel those notes in his boots, in the stock of his L85 rifle, and in the exact angle at which he held his chin under the huge bearskin helmet. To the tourists with their cameras, he was precisely what they thought he would be, a red statue of tradition that didn't move or blink, as permanent as the stones he stood on. But even though he had black fur on his head, his eyes moved all the time. Marcus was 32 years old, which was older than most of the boys who did ceremonial chores. The younger guards thought that wearing a dress uniform was a break from true soldiering. Marcus saw things in a different way. He had learned from 2 tours in Helmand that the threat level changes. They don't go away. The abilities that let you stay alive in Afghan compounds, reading crowds, counting exits, and keeping an eye on hands, worked just as well in the middle of London. When the weather changed, his left knee still hurt. It was a constant reminder of the IED that had terminated his infantry career and led him here. Some of his friends had sent their condolences when he got ceremonial responsibilities, as if standing guard at royal houses was somehow less real than being a soldier. They didn't get what Marcus had figured out fast enough. The outfit was changed, but the task was still the same: stand between people who couldn't protect themselves and danger. And just now, all of his instincts from 20 years in the military were warning him that something was amiss. The pen for the media looked odd. It always looked like a mess, with tripods twisted up, camera bags strewn around boots, and photographers knocking lenses as they fought for the best spot. But today, the pandemonium had a rhythm to it, a planned disorder that made Marcus's shoulder blades itch with recognition. He has seen this before in villages where Taliban fighters tried to hide among regular people. Too much show and not enough realness. He was especially interested in one man. He was in his late 20s, had a clean-shaven face, and was pallid like someone who had spent too many nights staring at ceilings. His press lanyard was hanging from a gray string, but the lamination seemed new. The edges were too neat, and the lettering was a little different from the official BBC and Reuters badges that were all around him. His jacket was too heavy for April weather, and was cut loose at the shoulders in a way that made it look like he was hiding something. His camera cap was still on, which was the worst thing of all. This man hardly touched his gear as the experienced photographers around him changed lenses and checked light meters. Instead, he carefully watched the royal viewing area, counting the spaces between protection personnel, identifying sight lines, and timing rotations. He stood motionless in a way that made it look like he was trying very hard to look relaxed. Marcus knew the stance. He had worn it years ago while waiting for the signal to breach a compound fence in Sangin. The dude wasn't present to snap pictures. He was there to work. The memory hit Marcus with painful clarity. A small market in Afghanistan, where his patrol had stopped to talk to people. Kids played football between the booths, and merchants sold fruit. Everything was regular and pleasant, until his sergeant seized his arm with hard fingers. "Count the men who aren't buying anything," he had said. 7. 7 men stood around the edge of the market, all pretending to shop while actually watching how the patrol moved. 2 good soldiers died in that ambush. Marcus's eyes moved methodically across the gathering in Graydon Court, using lessons learned in blood. The bogus photographer wasn't alone himself. Couldn't be by myself, not if he was good at his work. There would be others willing to help each other out and take advantage of any havoc their main operator made. He looked at them one by one. The woman with the stroller was in a spot where she could see both the royal part and the main escape routes. The maintenance worker's attire was right, but his posture was wrong. He seemed too awake and ready, like a soldier attempting to look like a civilian. A street seller whose cart was set up to move around instead of sell, and whose eyes were on security rotations instead of possible clients. 4 verified enemies, and maybe more that he hadn't found yet. They were all waiting for something. The revelation hit him like a cold shower. This wasn't spying. This was the last step in getting ready to carry out the plan. A child's voice rang out clearly and loudly above the clamor of the throng. "Papa, why isn't that soldier moving?" The query came from the royal section, where a little person in navy blue stood behind a chain fence that kept official observers and the general public apart. Prince George is now 10 years old, and his features already exhibit the keen clarity that made him indisputably royal. His coat was wonderfully smooth. His shoes shone like mirrors in the afternoon light, and his dark hair was styled like an adult's. But even though he was dressed up, he moved like any other youngster his age, shifting his weight from foot to foot and tilting his head as he looked at the guards with real interest. "Because that's his job," said his protection officer, a lady in her 50s whose sharp eyes never stopped moving even while she spoke. "He stands guard so that everyone else can enjoy the ceremony without worry." George nodded solemnly, and then went back to examining the guardsmen with the focused attention of someone who knew they were seeing something essential, not just something fun. He looked from one soldier to the next, studying how they stood, how they handled their rifles, and how they acted. But his schooling had taught him more than simply how to appreciate ceremonies. He had been trained by protection experts twice a week to spot things that were out of place, including the photographer who wasn't shooting pictures, the maintenance worker who was in the incorrect place, and the visitor who never looked away from the show everyone else was watching. His teachers had turned it into a game. Find the individual who doesn't belong. But George knew it was really serious, which is why he felt sick when he saw not one, but 3 strange things among the crowd. 1. The photojournalist in the media pen, whose camera lens cap stayed on. 2. The woman with the stroller set it up so that she could see clearly, not so that her child would be comfortable. 3. The maintenance guy, whose tools stayed where they were while he watched security guards go by. George had learned the pattern for when more than one strange thing happened at the same time. It wasn't a coincidence. It was coordination. His throat was dry, but his training stayed strong. There were no startling movements or evident alarms. They just watched carefully and got ready to alert if the strange things became dangers. At that point, Marcus saw that the boy's face had completely transformed. George was more than just alert now. He was doing his own threat assessment with the carefulness of someone much older. He had been taught to spot things that didn't belong, even when he was 10, and just now, he was writing down the exact threats that had made Marcus's internal alarms go out. The bogus photographer was gone. He had easily slipped out of the media pen while the audience was fixated on the sound of marching boots getting closer. His jacket hid part of his press card, and he walked along the barrier with a perfectly planned smile that seemed casual but was too meticulously managed to be real. He was going to the royal section for George. Under the bearskin shade, Marcus's jaw grew tight. He wanted to move, to intercept, and to position himself between the menace and the target. But 300 years of tradition kept him still. The guards stayed in formation. The guards did not leave their ceremonial posts. Never. There is no reason. The man got to the edge of the royal viewing area, where there was only a basic chain and 2 plainclothes officers between him and the prince. He leaned forward in a way that showed he thought he should be obeyed. "Come on then, Your Highness," he murmured. His voice was loud enough for George to hear, but not loud enough to wake up the protection detail right away. "Come on, let's get you to the car. Your dad is waiting by the silver Bentley." Marcus felt a chill run down his back. Not true. Those words were all wrong. The royal car today was a black Range Rover, not a Bentley. Also, protocol would never allow an unknown photographer to get close to the prince, let alone tell him how to move. Marcus's assumptions were reinforced by George's reply. The boy's head slanted a little, which is the same look kids get when adults say something that doesn't fit what they know to be true. He had gotten a lot of instruction in protection. Listen for the wrong details and don't get involved if they don't match. The man got closer, and his smile became more serious. "You'd be brave about it," he added. Marcus saw how his right hand brushed against his camera bag, and how his elbow kept locked to his ribs. That backpack didn't have any cameras or other picture gear in it. George's throat worked once every time he swallowed. His gaze didn't wander toward the people who were protecting him. He should have known better. Sudden movement might make things worse and lead a probe into violence. He had only one choice, one way to let someone know he was in danger without saying anything. George slowly and naturally raised his hand, as if he were brushing his hair against the wind. His palm was open, his thumb was tucked across, and his fingers folded down in a specific order. Nor a child's fidget, nor random movement. The universal distress signal taught in schools all throughout Britain, but never meant to be used. "I am in danger and I can't talk." Marcus could see it perfectly from his ceremonial position. He felt like he had been hit by a physical blow when he got recognition. The same signal that had been shown to him in briefings, practiced in training scenarios, and talked about in general as something that could save a life one day. That was today. The man's hand had found the zipper on his camera bag and was expertly easing it down. Marcus saw black metal with sharp edges through the crack. It was the obvious shape of a small gun, not a camera, not press equipment, but a weapon. There was more, though. Marcus's peripheral vision picked up activity at 2 more places in the crowd. A mother with a stroller stood at the far barrier, not paying attention to her child but to the way the protection officer was moving around. A maintenance worker in a bright vest stood too close to the guarded area beside the service entrance. His toolbox was ready for quick access instead of work. 3 things to worry about. This wasn't a chance. It was planned. Something shiny caught the light for a second, and then went back into the woman's pram. The maintenance worker's palm rested on the latch of his toolbox, and his fingers tapped in time with the band's percussion section. They were all in sync, waiting for a signal. Marcus's training kicked in with crystal clear clarity. There were several enemies. They were all working together, and he knew who his main target was. In Helmond, this pattern had come before complicated ambushes. In the middle of London, it signaled that something much worse than a simple grab was happening. The fake photographer's eyes moved back and forth between the woman and the maintenance worker. A small nod passed between them that was almost impossible to see, but clear to anyone who knew how to read tactical communications. They were all going to move at the same time. Time was squeezed into a single instant of choosing. On one side was a long history of unbroken custom, with strict rules on ceremonial duty and the iron rule that guards would always stay in their posts no matter what. On the other side, a 10-year-old youngster was making a frantic signal while a gunman got ready to take him. When the time came to choose, there wasn't really an option. The sound of Marcus Hale's boots hitting the old stone was like a gunshot. The blast cut through the brass music and the bustle of the crowd in the midday air. Everyone in the courtyard turned their heads at once. The sound made cameras turn. Tourists were confused and gasped. and even the regimental band stopped for half a beat before getting back in time. No guardsman had ever broken formation in 300 years of ceremonial duty. Not once. For no reason at all. Up until now. As he turned, his bright red tunic stood out against the pale stones. The rifle came off its ceremonial rest and into firing position with perfect timing. The movement was so fluid that it seemed like it was planned, but every tourist in the courtyard could feel it. This wasn't show anymore. This was a soldier reacting to a threat. The bearskin hat that had been hiding his face suddenly appeared to give him power instead of hiding it. His voice rang out across the courtyard with the authority of someone who had delivered commands that could mean life or death in areas where indecision meant a body bag. "Step back, hands visible." The culprit stopped in his tracks, and the fake smile on his face turned into something ugly. For a moment, he looked nearly funny, with his mouth still half-curved from trying to be charming. His eyes grew wide when he realized that his well-crafted strategy was falling apart. "Step back," Marcus said again, his voice firm as a rock. The rifle's muzzle followed the man's center mass with perfect accuracy. Phones sprouted like a forest of glowing rectangles all around the courtyard. Everyone was trying to film something that had never happened before. The man gripped the strap of his camera bag with his left hand, and his knuckles turned white with stress. "I don't know what you think. Now I can see your hands." Protection officers appeared out of nowhere, their own weapons drawn, and their voices cut through the chaos with clear professional orders. But at that very clear instant, they all knew who had seen the danger first. Before any of them, the guard in the red tunic had moved. The suspect's gaze flew toward the nearest exit as they weighed their alternatives and figured out the odds. The tourist mask had completely come off, showing something harder and more desperate underneath. His jaw moved once, then twice, and suddenly his face set with the hard determination of a man who has already decided to be violent. He put his right hand deep within the camera bag. The first gunshot sounded like thunder over Graydon Court. The music bounced off the walls of the palace and echoed back in a way that seemed to last forever. But it wasn't Marcus's gun that went off. The suspect's gun went off by accident as he ripped it out of the bag. The bullet hit cobblestones 3 yards from the nearest tourist, bringing up a shower of stone chips that cut a man's leg and made him scream and fall to his knees. Things became crazy. Parents pulled their kids away from the barriers. People who were on vacation ran into each other in a blind panic, and their phones shook so much that the videos would be impossible to see. The carefully planned ceremony turned into a primordial panic as hundreds of people hurried to get away from the sound of gunfire. But Marcus Hale didn't flinch. His gun kept on target, his finger on the trigger's breaking point, and his voice cut through the screaming with icy calm. "Let it go now." The gunman's gun swung in a frenzied arc as he looked for a victim. A second person jumped out of the throng behind him. This person was an accomplice who had been waiting on the side and was now trying to seize Prince George one last time by jumping over the barriers. Before Marcus could think about it, his body moved. His boots pushed him sideways, cutting right across the accomplice's route while keeping his weapon aimed at the main threat. The man hit him while he was running, but Marcus was ready. Years of fighting at close range turned into one deadly answer. The rifle butt swung in a cruel arc, hitting the accomplice on the collarbone and breaking it, which made him bend in half. As he fell, the crowd commotion drowned out the man's choked grunt. But Marcus didn't let him go. He pushed the man back against the iron barrier with his shoulder, shaking the whole building. "Stay down," he growled, and his voice promised that things would become worse if the command wasn't followed. The protective crew had also made a living shield around Prince George at the same time. Ballistic umbrellas sprung open to provide a protective roof, as officers with drawn Glocks advanced to keep the main gunman in check. But Marcus's peripheral vision saw the bigger image coming together. It wasn't only about the guy with the gun. The woman with the stroller had given up all pretense. She flipped the pram over with violent ease, showing that it wasn't a child but a customized riot control equipment with tear gas canisters, set up in a rough but effective way to spread them out. Just as a security guard reached her, her thumb hit the activation switch. The maintenance guy beside the service door moved with experienced precision. When he opened his toolbox, it clicked open to expose bolt cutters and what appeared like a small explosive device. It wasn't big enough to bring down walls, but it was big enough to break through the secure perimeter and cause panic. Two plainclothes officers tackled him to the ground as he was already advancing for the chain fence. A lot of enemies, several threats. Marcus's training told him that this was planned. Several enemies had been taken out, but the mayhem in Graydon Court was far from ended. The protection team recognized they weren't dealing with just one gunman, but a coordinated cell, and the radio talk got louder on every frequency. Officers who had been keeping a ceremonial distance suddenly rushed into the courtyard from hidden places, turning what had seemed like a tourist spot into a real fighting zone. With a loud hiss, the tear gas device went off, spreading thick white smoke into one corner of the courtyard. People yelled and ran blindly, with parents holding on to their kids as they ran away from the poisonous cloud. In the middle of all the confusion, Marcus saw two more people going against the crowd. They were other conspirators who had been waiting for the right moment to act. This wasn't an attempt to kidnap someone. This was a military-style operation to get a royal child out of the country, while everyone else was in on the plan. And it was almost successful in a matter of seconds. The gunman was now spinning erratically, trying to keep his gun on aim. For a moment, it looked like he may try to shoot his way out, firing at the cops, the crowd, or anything that moved. His fingers squeezed on the trigger, and his muscles tensed themselves for a fight. The Glock that the protection officer had barked once, loud and clear. The round hit the gunman high in the shoulder, turning him around and making his gun fall to the ground. He fell to one knee, holding his arm as blood dripped between his fingers. His face was twisted in pain, and the awful realization of failure. The accomplice writhed again under Marcus's weight before going motionless. During the fight, his jacket had spilled open, showing zip-tie restraints, a small canister that smelled like isopropyl alcohol, but was labeled as hand sanitizer, and a cheap burner phone with a cracked screen that showed a detailed map of the palace grounds with notes on timing and guard positions. The phone showed more than just this action, though. When forensic teams gently took it out of the suspect's pocket, the screen lit up with communication threads that caused the officers who were looking into the case exchange worried expressions. Names like Shepherd, Architect, and Cleaner made it seem like there was a complex network. Recent messages talked about not only this effort, but also Package B and Package C, which were additional planned operations and royal targets. The woman with the homemade gas device had also brought similar communication tools. Her phone had pictures of school pickup routes, sports event calendars, and full floor plans of royal homes that people shouldn't have been able to get. The maintenance worker's toolbox had fake IDs for several government buildings, and what looked like inside information regarding security shift changes. This showed that the worker had planned the theft, not just acted on impulse. But more than that, there was proof of infiltration at levels that made the protection officers' faces go pale. For months, someone who had access to secret security protocols had been giving this cell information. "Jesus Christ," one of the forensic officers said quietly as they took a picture of a laminated card that looked like a real royal staff pass. They had help from the inside. As more suspects were taken from the crowd, a tourist with a hidden radio and a street vendor whose cart had enough sedative to put a toddler to sleep for hours, the plot became clearer. This wasn't a desperate grab by those looking for a chance. This was a precise job done by specialists who knew the ins and outs of the system and had all the time in the world. It had only been halted when a guard saw something wrong, and a 10-year-old prince recalled his training well enough to beg for help when he needed it most. The courtyard progressively became the uneasy silence that comes after violence. Both suspects were lying on the old stones, one bleeding through his sleeve as plainclothes officers kept the area safe. Forensic teams were immediately putting on gloves, taking pictures of the evidence, and making a list of the equipment used in a kidnapping that almost worked. Throughout it all, Prince George stood behind his wall of officers, pallid but steadfast. He looked across the courtyard and saw Marcus once the immediate threat had passed, and the ballistic shields had been dropped. There was no smile or wave, just a moment of connection between two people who had shared something that would keep them together forever. When the youngster spoke, his voice was soft but clear enough to carry. I remembered the signal. Even though there was a 40-year age difference, Marcus's throat clenched. He answered steadily and confidently. You used it perfectly, sir." That was all that needed to be said. The boy was okay. The threat was over. The job was done. Later, when the suspects were taken away in handcuffs and the throng was removed so that forensic teams could do their jobs, Marcus would be asked about protocol and precedent, about the unusual break in ceremonial etiquette that had saved a royal life. Parliament would talk about it, police would look into it, and newspapers would guess about tradition versus necessity. But what happened right after was much more complicated than just a procedural review. Counterterrorism Command took up the investigation within hours of the event. The data found on phones and other devices showed a plot that went all the way up to the highest ranks of palace security. Before midnight, 3 staff members were taken into custody. Their access privileges were suspended, and their communication data were subpoenaed. The interrogations painted a picture that scared everyone who was there. The cell had planned not only George's kidnapping, but also a series of synchronized attacks against several royal targets. The path Princess Charlotte took to school had been planned. They had been watching Prince William's planned charitable engagements. Even the Queen's doctor's appointments had been somehow messed up and written down. This was Phase 1. The head investigator told a quickly put-together security briefing. They wanted George as leverage for the others. A hostage who was 10 years old would have stopped us from doing anything else. Major Nathaniel Rowe was in the strange situation of having to explain to a room full of officials why a guardsman had broken convention. The officials were starting to realize that breaching precedent had probably stopped a disaster much worse than an abduction. The proof was too much to ignore. If Marcus hadn't acted quickly, the synchronized cell would have worked, and the effects would have spread across the royal family for months. Lance Corporal Marcus Hale broke 300 years of ceremonial rules. Rowe finished his report. He also showed the kind of initiative and tactical knowledge that we should be praising, not punishing. Everyone in the room stopped talking. After that, the head of the Counterterrorism Command cleared his throat. "I think we can put the protocol question to rest. What matters is that this guardsman was trained well enough to see a complicated operation before our own protection specialist did. That wasn't fair to the officers who were protecting them. Once the threat was made clear, they acted professionally, but it brought to light an uncomfortable fact about ceremonial security. Occasionally, the personnel who were taught to look beyond the pageantry were better at spotting true danger than those who were focused on running the event itself. But at that moment, standing in the afternoon sunshine of Graydon Court with stone chips all over his boots and the sound of gunfire still ringing in his ears, Marcus Hale felt something he hadn't felt since his final patrol in Afghanistan: the peaceful satisfaction of a job well done. He had been in the middle of danger and innocence. He had helped a child when no one else was close enough to notice it. And if that meant breaching 300 years of rules, going to court-martial, or getting fired, or whatever else may happen, well, some things were more important than following the rules. Some responsibilities went beyond dress and ceremony. At times, a man had to remember what the red tunic really stood for: service, protection, and the willingness to act when action was needed most. Today was one of those times, and when the time came for the test, Marcus Hale put responsibility to people above duty to tradition. He would always make that option again without thinking twice. Would you have seen the warning flags, such the improper credentials, the wrong car, and the small things that made a predator stand out among the press? And would you have had the courage to violate a custom that had lasted for hundreds of years the moment you saw that urgent sign? Sometimes the bravest thing to do is not to make a big deal out of it. Sometimes it's a kid recalling a lesson they thought they would never need, or a soldier putting safety ahead of rules when it counts most. If this story touched you, please like it and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, so you never miss these moments. Let someone who needs to know about the universal distress signal know about this. That information could save someone's life. There it is, your next Royal Guard narrative. Click it now, and I'll see you tomorrow with another instance that illustrates the same thing. Real heroes are the ones who do something when everyone else is looking.